Hello, LinkedIn. Welcome to the Voice of Supply Chain. I am your host, Katherine McCleery, and some of you are probably wondering, what is she doing? Why is she live? What is Voice of Supply Chain? Most of my network is, well, I guess it's about half and half marketers and half procurement and supply chain people. So the marketing half is probably very curious. And so just an intro, since you guys are used to Sarah Scudder hosting this for the last few years, she asked me to step in and take over. And since I've been marketing in the supply chain and procurement tech space for about 6 years now, it was a pretty natural transition for me. And I love hosting, I love podcasting. This is not my first rodeo. Some of you may be familiar with The Sourcing Hero. That was my very first podcast. And then I did Procurement for the People under Art of Procurement as well for a limited series podcast. So I am back in front of the camera and talking to all of you. I'm so excited. The point of this show, Voice of Supply Chain, is to talk about and recognize the voices of people within supply chain and their stories. They have very interesting stories, and we have such an amazing guest today. She does not fall short as an inspiring speaker in this space. And so it is my pleasure to welcome today's guest. Her name is Juliette Samson. Hi, Juliette.
Hello, Katherine. How are you?
I'm so good. I'm excited and a little nervous. Just excuse my nerves. We're gonna get through this, and hopefully the next run is going to be even better. But I just want to welcome you. Thank you for coming on for my first episode. I feel like this is a really special one. And as I've gotten to know you over the last month or so, I've kind of fallen in love with your story. And so officially, I'd like to introduce you so that all of our audience can get themselves ready for your story. Juliette is an accomplished and recognized private board director, global C-suite executive, technology and business influencer with over 35 years in pharma, CPG, telecom, and logistics industries. She's held leadership positions in supply chain, manufacturing, M&A, and divestitures in Fortune 50 and mid-sized companies across global markets. Most recently, Juliette was the CIO of GenPro Inc. She's also on the board of directors and leads the technology committee of Targatek. And she also serves on the board of directors of the National Kidney Foundation. Huge titles, a lot of accomplishments. This is an incredible way to start my experience with Voice of Supply Chain. So welcome, Juliette.
Thank you, Katherine. And it's such an honor, really, to do this with you. And I really want to make this wonderful for your first experience on Voice of Supply Chain. I know I spoke a lot in the past with Sarah, and I got to know you as well. And I'm really, really excited. If I could just influence a couple of people on the call, I think we have a lot of different types of people on the call. So I'm going to be covering a lot of different things, and hopefully somebody can take away a little nugget. I would also just want to say that I'd like to get through this so that questions could come up. And I highly encourage everyone on the call to please ask me any question you would like. I'm very happy to answer any of those.
Yes, for sure. I do see comments come through on this. So if you have something you'd like to ask Juliette, feel free. We're going to cover a lot today. And the first thing I want to start with is, Juliette, can you describe yourself in 3 to 5 words?
So that's a challenge, but thanks for that question. I would just say that I'm a transformational leader. And when I say transformational, I mean business transformation, technology, cultural. So I think that's where I evolved. And I think that's the way I would like to describe myself.
And I would describe you that way as well as we go through this interview. I think everybody else is going to understand those three words. If anybody's picking up on an accent in Julia's voice, that's because there is. Juliette, where did you grow up?
So thanks for that question. Yeah, so I do have an accent, even though I really, really prefer not to, but I guess it makes me different. And it's always a question that people ask me. Although when I travel in mid-United States, they think I have a New York accent. So yes, I grew up in the U.S. Here in New York, in Forest Hills, but I was born in communist Romania. And when I left, it was still a very, very much of a communist country. It is a city called Cluj-Napoca. And I had a very interesting journey, really leaving Romania because people couldn't leave a communist country. It's just not done. So I was really, really fortunate where I had a parent that did a sabbatical at NYU and decided he wants to be in the world of the free. The NYU scientists, along with Jacob Javits, who was the governor of New York at the time, decided to help us leave. And we left. So it was a real big deal, and we were really, really fortunate. I feel really fortunate.
Absolutely. And a little bit more on your parents, because this is a really important detail, I think, that helps me understand you as a person and your determination. Tell me about your parents' history and who they were.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. My parents both are scientists. They're both physicists. My father is a university professor, like I mentioned. He was on a sabbatical, and that's when everything happened. And by the way, we couldn't communicate between Romania and United States. So a very interesting, just a little interesting piece is that they all bought the same book, and they were communicating by code. So they were referencing to different pages of the book so that we could communicate, because when my father returned to Romania, he couldn't communicate to the US unless they start describing this book, and then they were decoding what they were saying. But yes, both of my parents are physicists. And I think what's kind of interesting to note, since I am also in the sciences and I also finished engineering at Cornell many years ago, my parents, while they were, scientists back in the old country, that was not an unusual thing. So for my mother to be an experimental physicist, she ended up working at Mount Sinai Hospital, doing research here in the United States. But back in Romania, she was also doing research, and that was not unusual. So, women had positions back in a communist world, in the sciences, in the MD. So that was very common. It was probably not as common in United States. So when she came here, and that was back in 1972, she had difficulty getting a job because she was just overqualified. There were not women like her in United States. But anyway, they were highly influential for me and my sister in terms of who we are today, for sure.
And I totally understand how your parents have influenced you in the sciences, and the motivation to succeed. And obviously there was some equality that communist Romania was providing you guys at that time. But even before that, the 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 part about your parents both being Auschwitz survivors, I think blew me away when I was first getting to know you. I couldn't believe that. How did that affect you growing up?
Yeah, so I mean, it's very interesting because yes, we're of Jewish faith. Both of my parents were in the Holocaust. My mother was in Auschwitz. She was liberated by the Americans and was sent over to Sweden because she was very ill. She had typhoid fever and she was going to die. So they sent her to Sweden, where she was in a hospital for about a year. And my father was liberated in Mauthausen by the British, I believe, if I remember it correctly. And then the two of them remet or met, I guess, many years later. My mother did return to Romania because her father was still alive. Her parents died, other than her father. So her brother, her mother, her two brothers, and her mother passed away in the gas chambers in Auschwitz, and my father lost his parents as well. So they remet in Romania many years later and got married. But I think what's relevant about this is that they're very resilient people, and they kind of made me very resilient. And so, that kind of, it gave me a drive. They pushed very hard education. I know, one of the things that, oftentimes people wonder is, how important is education? And I think education is super important. Interestingly enough, I just recently revisited and listened to the I'm losing my train of thought here. I listened to at the Stanford University. He spoke about his experiences, Steve Jobs, right? And he had no education, right? And he talked about his capabilities. But I do very much feel that education is a passport for your future, and it is important to go to school. And my parents were very, very supportive and actually pushed for that. So yeah, I just think that being raised in a communist world, being raised by scientists that survived and had a survival attitude, definitely rubbed off on me, making me more assertive, making me more ambitious, and I guess more resilient.
I mean, just looking at your resume, I can see that you have been ambitious, motivated, and resilient. And we're going to dig into it and go from the beginning and learn a little bit more about your earlier life. We're talking about education and the importance of education, and your parents influencing you and really encouraging you to go into mathematics and science. And I know that you have several degrees, but you started out at Cornell, is that right?
Yeah, I did. And, it's interesting because I really started out as a mathematician. I really wanted to do mathematics. And as you very well know, Cornell, it was a very expensive school, and it still is. And at that time, it was just really, really difficult to pay those fees. So my parents were like, if we're going to send you to an expensive school, you're going to have to do something that after 4 years you can actually work in. And my father did not believe mathematics was one of those, primarily because you needed a PhD. So I could finish 4 years and then I have to go and get a PhD. And he did not believe that I necessarily will follow a PhD, which I didn't know if I would or if I wouldn't. But basically, we negotiated, and he said, you really should select a degree where you can actually work after 4 years. And engineering was one of those, and it was very close to mathematics. And so, it kind of worked out, and I said, fine. And then later on in my career and in my education, I did learn that mathematics was not for me, because we started to talk about n dimensions in the universe. And I'm a very practical kind of person, much more like my mother, who was an experimental physicist, as opposed to my father, who was a theoretical physicist. And so I'm not a theoretical person. I am a hands-on implementation, transformational strategist, if you will. And I think engineering suited me best. And it was really good that I listened to him. And that he our negotiations was a win-win, if you will. So yes, I finished engineering. Yeah, so I guess that's the story about that.
Well, I'm not a math person either. You couldn't pay me enough to have a
To do
degree
that.
in mathematics. But I am wondering, through your in your reflection and looking through all of your professional experience now and knowing your path, would you have changed anything about your education before going into your professional life? Like, if you could change anything, would there be anything different?
So I would say no, and I'll tell you why. I had a great run in my 4 years in college from many perspectives. One is obviously the education, but also, I was able to practice my math, and like you, there was the Cornell football team that could barely pass, and they had to pass. And so, guess what? I was working and I was teaching them math, and they passed. And I was also working at the electron positron accelerator at Cornell with Max Planck Institute physicists. And so between that and teaching, and I also stayed one summer and I taught Ithaca High School. And this way I was able to pay at least part of my education. My parents paid like a third. I paid a third by working during college. And then I paid the third for 10 years after, once I was working. But honestly, I wouldn't have changed anything, because I kind of feel like, I got an education from the school, but I also got a lot of knowledge from interfacing with the Max Planck Institute people, and that's who I hanged out with. They were Europeans. I felt very close with them. And I just think that it gave me this opportunity to do things that maybe others didn't get a chance to do. And I feel the experience was very, very good, and I wouldn't change anything from that perspective.
I'm still stuck on what did you call it? The positron?
It's an electron positron accelerator. So what happens
Okay,
is electrons running this way and positrons running the other way, and then they collide. And then we were studying what happens with that collision. So it was all kinds of mapping and studies and whatnot. Of course, I was just doing the paperwork and the experiments with them, but it was very interesting.
okay,
Yeah.
so what happens? What happened when they
Well,
collided?
it just breaks up into smaller pieces, and then people study, what is the smallest piece that it breaks up into, and how much energy does it have, and how does it behave. And I mean, I don't remember anything else other than that. I know I did a lot of charts and a lot of mapping, and it was more, physics in terms of, how can you use those small particles? Can they be used in the healthcare industry? Can they be used in other ways? Um, and I'm sure there are lots of people out there that work that. There's a big accelerator up in Long Island. There's a huge accelerator out in California, and then there's a big one at Cornell, and they do all kinds of studies about small particles. So you have the universe, and then you have the very, very small particles. This is about the very, very small particles. Yeah.
Well, you're incredibly impressive. Physics is another subject that I was banned from, and my arch nemesis in my senior year of high school. Made it 3 days, couldn't handle the math part of it. So kudos to you for going that far and actually being involved in scientific experiments and engagements. Just one of the many impressive things about you.
Thank you.
Another thing that really impresses me is that as you started your career and throughout your career, you took every opportunity to continue your education. So tell me, and tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I kind of feel, and I think most of the people on the call, including yourself, would agree that education is a continuous thing, right? And so unless you keep up with, and it doesn't have to be formal, but unless you keep up with your education, you kind of fall behind. And that goes hand in hand with transformation, right? You got to keep up with what's going on in the market. What is the newest technology? What are the newest supply chain solutions? What's out there relative to your company, relative to your function? And really, engage in reading, in learning, in going to summits, in talking to other people. What are other people doing? Like, one thing, Katherine, that I think is really important in terms of my function across all of my jobs is I never do things for the first time. Like, I mean, I do things for the first time, but I do like to consult with others in terms of what did they do and how did it go. Because you don't have to be the first in everything. You just have to do it well. And in order to do it well, you need to learn how others have done it. So I believe in continuous education. I believe in continuous evolution in technology. I believe in changes in the marketplace and keeping up with that. And the only way you can do that is by continuing education. So as far as I'm concerned, I do that all the time. Formally, I have an MBA. I was sent to executive education training. So I went to Columbia. I also went to some classes at Harvard. I also did some master's in pharmaceuticals at Rutgers. So I always did different things, but these are more formal things, and I truly enjoy them, by the way, much more than my Cornell experience. Because when I'm not stressed and I'm not required to have grades and to take exams, I do so much better and I enjoy it more. Probably I absorb a lot more as well. So I think that there's value in going to college, going to work, going back to college, going back to work, continuously learn.
And I'm betting that the continuous education helped you make greater impacts with every role that you held. And anybody can look at your LinkedIn profile and see kind of that gradual rise in your career and
Yeah.
major impacts on each role. So I'm wondering, well, I know, but I'm sure the audience is wondering, where did all this ambition come from?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if I'm more ambitious than a lot of people, but I think it's an inherent capability or personality. But success breeds success. So, one of the things that I truly believe in is, in order to excel and to be different, you really need to kind of plop yourself into uncomfortable situations. So take roles that maybe others don't want, or maybe others feel they can't do, or things that are not comfortable. Because if you're always going to go with what you are comfortable with, you're going to stay where you're comfortable. But if you jump into things that maybe are not so comfortable, you tend to learn a lot, and you also tend to exceed as well. So that's sort of a takeaway for me is always look for opportunities that perhaps others don't want. So I don't necessarily have to compete per se with others. I just want to see what isn't being done, right? How can I help the business? What can I do that would help, my boss, my organization, my company? And just take on challenges, right? And so I tend to do that, and then you succeed, and then you get more energy, and then you want to do it again, and yeah, success breeds success. So just in my opinion, I keep trying, and sometimes I fail, right? I mean, you don't always succeed, and if you don't fail, you don't learn, right? But that's sort of my motto, and that's how I got to different things. I know it's kind of interesting. Maybe you would wonder why supply chain, right? So I grew up as a technologist. I did telecommunication. I did IT. Why supply chain, right? Like, where did that come from? And it was an opportunity that nobody else wanted. I was asked to take it on. And I cannot say that I wasn't concerned, but I said, "Listen, it's not rocket science, It's data-driven decisions, it's analytics, it's predictive analytics, it's basic things that I knew how to do, and I was given that opportunity, and I'm really, really happy because it took me out of the technology world and put me into the business world. And now I had to look at things from a EBITDA, ROI, P&L perspective. And I was a business operational leader, not just a technologist that was looking to bring the latest technology to a company, right? So technologists shouldn't just do that. They should enable the business. And the only way you can enable the business is be in the business and have that responsibility. So it was a great experience for me when I was at World Finer Foods, where I was in the food and beverage business, in the CPG food and beverage business, where I was asked to do supply chain in addition to being the CIO, and help the company turn around. So we can go into that a little later, but maybe I went off your questioning a little bit.
No, it's fine. You're covering a lot. And I'll say, I totally feel you on the challenges and taking on hard things. And I'm looking back at my notes and I can see that, you said, I have great faith in balanced universe. Things are meant to be for a reason, and you're given challenges that you can carry. One of my toxic traits is choosing hard things, one after the other. I just choose the hard path. I like challenges in my work and in my life. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not. But as far as my work is concerned, challenges and going for challenges and feeling uncomfortable has always paid off for me. And so I love that about you. And I love that's, part of your motto. And I can see it. It's very well reflected in your experience. And we did kind of start to touch on your work experience and that move from, technology to supply chain. So let's dig back into that. I do have a question for you about another job experience, but I think it's really interesting, the time in your career when you started to move into executive leadership. You had been in IT strategy, implementation, and operations. So at what point in your career do you think that you wanted to shift into transformation? Was that, before supply chain, after supply chain? Was it kind of during? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I don't even know if I have an answer for that, to be honest, because sometimes things kind of happen, right? So very early in my career, when I was at AT&T, where I was actually 22 years in the telecom industry, I had a boss who basically asked me to write down my ambitions for the next 5 years. And it was the very beginning of my career. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't know. But I did, but he made me do it, and I wasn't happy at all. But once I did it, I was really, really happy. And guess what? I continued doing that every single 5 years, because it's really important to kind of put things in perspective and figure out where you want to be and who you want to be and what you want to do. The problem is that things don't happen exactly the way you would like them. And nothing is ever a straight line from point A to point B. There's all kinds of things that happen, good things, bad things, and they kind of divert you from where you wanted to go. So you end up in the same place, but not directly, right? So, interestingly enough, I always thought I was going to be a telecom professional. But the telecom industry shrank in 2005 or so. And I had to make a decision. I was getting to my mid age, if you will. And I had to make a decision of, is this really what I want to do? And I said, what's close? Very much like my conversation with my father, mathematics and engineering. Well, engineering is more practical, do that. I was in the telecom industry. The industry was really shrinking. I was doing great. In 22 years, I moved, every 3 years, I moved up in role. But what I did not realize only later is that by being in one company for that long, you don't really get raises, and you're really not paid what you're worth. So I had to make some decisions at that point, and I decided to go into IT. And that's when I went on to Wall Street and I worked for Merrill Lynch, and I got a step function increase in salary. And I was totally surprised because I didn't know. And at that time, Katherine, things were, the internet wasn't that relevant, and there was no glass door that could tell you what people are getting paid in your roles. I was already a VP at AT&T. And when I went to Merrill Lynch, I got a step function increase, and then I got another step function increase when I went to Pfizer. So changing roles, every 3 years, not in the same company, changing companies gives you that lift. And you really do need to know what you're worth. So that's something I wanted to mention. The other thing I wanted to mention is, because we did talk a little bit earlier about ambition and things like that. I have for whatever reason, and this is why I said to you that ambition is very inherent and it's very basic to your DNA. I always see things half full, right? So things can happen that are not good, but I still see it half full. I still see what's good in that as opposed to what's bad in that. And when things don't work out, and there are many times in your life when things don't work out, you gotta manage your mind. You gotta find what's good, take the good, leave the bad, and move on, right? So that's a very, very important thing. And so I'm trying to go back to your question because I want to make sure I address the question. What was your question again? Could you go back to it again? Because I'm diverting a little bit.
I was kind of combining a couple questions,
Yeah.
and I think what I'm really curious about is two things. Your move into the head of supply chain role,
Okay.
which I believe you had a dual role, right? It was head of
Yes.
supply chain and CIO.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's major. But then also we're working with this theme of transformation, and then so at some point in your career you started to specialize in
Transformation.
business transformation.
That was
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for reminding me and taking me back.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was never intending to be a CIO, or was I intended to be head of supply chain, or was I intended to be a transformational leader, right? It evolved, right? These are the things that evolve through your career. So because I had the opportunity to move from a Fortune 50 company to a mid-sized company. So in Fortune 50 companies, which was the Merrill Lynch and the Pfizers and the AT&T of the worlds, you gain a lot of experience and you learn a lot. You have big organizations that you manage. You become a leader. You're learning how to lead people. But it's very narrow. It's in your area, right? So being, a technology leader, I was doing mergers and acquisitions. I was doing data center consolidations. I was doing cloud enablement. I was doing very specific roles, big project specific roles. When you go to a mid-sized company, you are not so vertical, you become more horizontal. You have to start to think more across the company. You have more access to the CEO and to the board. You start to understand the company's strategy. So by going to a mid-sized company, I was able to get involved in more aspects of the business other than just technology, if you will. So when I went to World Finer Foods, which is a mid-sized company, that's where I became a CIO. And like I explained earlier, about a year and a half into my CIO role, after I did some major transformations or changes and saved them money and enabled them and gave them more scalability and give them more efficiency, they've asked me to also pick up supply chain.
Just pick up this little thing called supply chain.
Well, it was interesting because the person that was there was a director before, and it was time for her to retire. So she was retiring, and they really didn't want to hire from the outside. I was already there a year and a half, and I think what's really important from this experience is that there's some really, really close-knit synergies between IT and supply chain. So if you're in a big company like a Pfizer, which is $100 billion in revenue, right? If you're head of supply chain there, you need to work very closely with their CIO because technology enables the business and it will also enable your supply chain capabilities, right? Automation is a very big thing. AI, machine learning. You apply all of those things to supply chain. Um, so, at a mid-sized company, they put together the two roles. They were very big roles, and I worked very, very hard and many, many, many hours, but it was definitely worth it because I've learned a lot. So in that role, I had procurement. So we procured third-party products from all over the world and sold them exclusively in the United States. World Final Foods, it's a sales and marketing company of non-perishable food and beverage. So they took third-party products and they sold them in the United States exclusively. So the supply chain was procurement. It was importation. So you had to have FDA knowledge, which I had to learn, which I absolutely didn't know. And I wouldn't call myself an expert. But again, as a leader, you have to surround yourself with experts. You have to learn how to do that. You're not a one-man show, right? You're an organization. And again, all this comes with experience and with time, right? So I cannot tell you, Katherine, that, I wanted to be a transformation leader and I became a transformation leader in an X time. It evolved, right? As leadership evolves. And so I surround myself with key subject matter experts. So I had somebody that did importation. I had somebody that did logistics, which was ocean freight and trucking and intermodal. Um, I personally knew a lot about predictive analytics, so I brought in demand planning, predictive analytics, and that's the IT piece of it, but it's also the supply chain piece of it because now you have to put a process around that on how do you, what is the input, what is the demand out there, right? So demand is supply chain, but the predictive analytics of demand is technology. So you meld those things. So you have to have processes as well as tools to be able to do the kinds of things you want to do. And it's a very nice synergy, if you will. So I brought in Demantra, which is an Oracle system to do predictive demand planning. Then warehousing. So warehousing was also something very new. But we looked at the warehouse network and take a look at where to place your warehouse based on the fact that you're bringing things from ocean freight. You want to be near ports. So all of these things are things that you have to look at. And we did an analysis and figured out, is the warehouse which we have in the right place? Do we have to have more than one? What's the best analogy and strategy? And through this whole activity and having a great leadership team and working together with marketing, with sales, we were able to basically save $8 to $10 million year over year, turn the company around, and eventually sell it because that was a strategy of the company. So it was a great experience. Also, because we are voice of supply chain, I want to talk more about supply chain, right?
Yeah.
So when I went there, when I went to this company, we had, I don't know, probably 1,400 SKUs, right? And by the way, we took this company through COVID, and our highest sales was during COVID. And it's very, very difficult, honestly, to keep the right inventory. Inventory levels are super important, right? Especially in the food and beverage industry where product expires, right? And because we had product coming from all over the world, the transportation timeframe was 8 to 12 weeks. So it's not like, I want the product and I'll have it tomorrow. You have to plan 12 to, 8 to 12 weeks ahead for that to come to you. So I think that, demand planning and warehousing was also a very key aspect of supply chain. And with the right people in place, and again, with the right predictions, nobody could predict COVID. Nobody could predict that people are going to be out of work and they couldn't work. And you had all kinds of, issues with transportation, with ships, with the workers. Nobody could predict that. And there's a joke because me and the CEO were constantly, joking and arguing about, do I have too much inventory or don't I have too much inventory? And it turned out, not that I want to, make things look better than they are. But it turned out that our owners, which were the two largest food distributors in the United States, basically announced at our town hall that we had the highest service level of providing the food for them. And that means we had the right inventory level. So I was very happy about that. But how did we get that? Yeah, I was very happy. So there's luck involved, there's analytics involved. But what I wanted to say is we had tons of SKUs, and I did a re-implementation of Oracle there, which was the ERP, the heart of our systems. And through this process, we took a look at our SKUs. And then the question is, do we want to keep all of these SKUs? We have so many. So you want to take a look at the turn of the SKUs. How much have we sold? What is the turn? How quickly do they move? And then, you do a SKU rationalization, and you basically, the things that don't move and the things that don't sell, just get rid of them, right? You don't want to keep them and throw them out. So we had an opportunity to re-implement an ERP, and through that process, we did a SKU rationalization, which then cleaned out our number of SKUs and how many things we're going to look at. And, you all know this. It's like, it's like marketing and sales 101, is that the top 20% of your product brings in 80% of your revenue. So you have to babysit those top 20% of your product. So why do I have the 100%? Maybe I need to cut that, right? Maybe I need to do less and do more with the things that are more lucrative and turn and sell, right? So when I went through this experience, I realized that transformation is my thing, right? There's a clear way of going into a company and figuring out how to cut costs, how to increase efficiency, how to do more for less. They're basic stuff, right? So a company that is not a technology-driven company should not have a data center and should not have a big technology group. Those things should be outsourced. You should use subject matter experts. So why should I be doing networking in-house when I can hire a third party to do networking for me, or desktop support, or manage my data center? So those are basic things that one should look at. Where do you spend your money? How much money does the company have to spend on IT? Do they have capital, or do they have ongoing costs? If they have capital, well, then maybe I will buy equipment. But if they don't, then I outsource it, and I pay an outsourcer on a monthly basis and use my ongoing money. So, cash flow, understanding finances are very, very important. And this is why you always have to be talking to the sales guy, the CFO. Always be close to your CFO. Always be close. Understand what's going on. And so, yeah, through time, you learn how to become a leader. You learn how to become a team player. You're not succeeding on your own. You have to have a very strong team, in your own team, right, with subject matter experts. And you have to be networking with your peers to understand what's going on in the sales area, in the demand planning, in marketing, in the financials. How do your financials look? How is your ROI? What do I need to do to increase my EBITDA on the top line, on the bottom line? So all those things I think are super important. And when I started to understand that, being in a smaller company and having my fingers nibble in different things, I think there's a formula on how to transform companies. And that's when I became a transformational leader.
Yeah, it sounds like once you kind of stepped into the arena of supply chain, maybe that was like your ticket and opening and expanding your perspective on learning the business, because it's less siloed. And to be a business leader and to understand the business, that also means to understand the supply chain. And I think that's a really cool example in your career of exactly that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have other examples in my career where I did IPOs. I worked with with Carly Fiorina, who was the first Fortune 50 female CEO in United States. And I had, she definitely influenced my career, and she took me out of the manufacturing and the R&D world. And, I did strategy work with her, and then we spinned off Lucent from AT&T under her leadership. There was a lot of learnings that I had from that. And so, I think that when you're an IT leader and you say that you're a CIO, it's really important for others to understand, at least for me, that I'm an operational leader as well. And being at the table in the ELT, executive leadership team, is
Right.
really, really important for a CIO. You cannot be siloed. If you're siloed as a technologist, you will absolutely not succeed.
Great timing, because I see, well, I'm a little bit late, but the chat has been active, and
Oh, okay.
yeah, Shachi over at Oro says, so good to hear you describe your journey from a technologist to a business operational leader. And then another comment, I know I'm going to mispronounce this name, Pratibha says, such valuable advice about shifting mindsets as well as industries. Juliette, thank you for sharing. It's very inspiring and eye-opening to learn that possibilities are endless. I love that. How do you feel about those comments?
I mean, I think it's very kind and very nice, but I definitely encourage people to do things that they're not comfortable with. And the only way to do it is to ask for more work. Figure out what your boss is missing and find out how you can help him or her. And you will gain a lot of knowledge and you will evolve. So I think these are important, important things.
I also think it's important, and I know, we're getting close to our time closing. We've got about 10 more minutes,
Yeah.
but I think it's super important that people understand that, as a voice in supply chain, it's not all about work. It's not all about your career. You are more than your career. You're also a mother and a wife. Tell me
Yes.
about your two children I know you're very proud of.
Yeah, so I'm going to be very quick on this end, but all I want to say to the women out there and to the men out there, that you can absolutely have a career and have a family. It is definitely doable. I'm going to bring some analogies here, and that is, when you have a profession or a job and something goes awry, it bounces back. It's like a ball that bounces back. But if something goes awry with your family and it breaks, it's very, very difficult to put it back together. So I would highly recommend that you figure out how to balance these two things. It's definitely doable. If you're married, it's very important to have a conversation as to who's going to go ahead and who's going to be more the homemaker. But you can switch that off. I have seen couples where for the first 5 years she's going ahead and then she takes a step back and he's going ahead, and they kind of switch up depending on the opportunities that come to them. But you do have to kind of agree as to who's going to be more in the home or around the children. So yes, I have two children, a 31-year-old, a 29-year-old. My 31-year-old is in the sciences. He's a biochemist. My daughter is also in the sciences. She's a biologist. She's doing an acupuncture master's right now. She's an EMT for 10 years and has saved many people's lives. And I'm very proud of them, for sure.
So there is something special, though, about your daughter. I know that we wanted to cover today. Go ahead and tell us about why you're on the board for the National Kidney
Foundation.
Association.
So thank you for that opportunity, Katherine. And I don't want to take too much time on this, but my daughter is very special. She actually has two kidney transplants, one at age of 14, one at age of 20. And unfortunately, she's up for another kidney transplant now at the age of 29. So we are going out and looking for kidney donors. If anybody's ever interested in learning about kidney donation, please feel free to contact me. You can find me in many different ways. I'm not going to go into that on the podcast. But like I said, she's an EMT for 10 years, saved many people's lives. So I certainly hope that someone is going to save hers. Her first kidney donor was her father. Her second kidney donor was an altruistic donor that we found, an amazing woman who was a nurse, very close to where her college was, in the town of her college, which she went to Lafayette. And now we're going to go out and look for another kidney. So as a result of all of this, and by the way, I was also a donor, but they found a huge tumor on my kidney as a result of the donation process. And
Okay, well, that's great.
My kidney and my tumor was removed, and I'm totally fine. But my daughter saved my life. So when you go through a kidney donation process, by the way, you have a major, major workup. So if anything isn't right, unfortunately, they will find it. So it's a good thing to do that too. And I'm living on one kidney for 10 years. My husband's living on one kidney for 15. I had a great grandmother who was born on one kidney and lived till 95. You don't need more than one, which is why our motto is share your spare. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, I can attest to this. I don't have two full kidneys either. I was born with a kidney issue and had to have most of one of them removed. So I only have about one and a half on a good day. I wish I could be the donor, but I'm sure somebody out there, somebody might be listening and hearing this, will look this up, and I can add a link in the comments later if you would like, if you're comfortable with that, if somebody would like to know more about this.
Yeah, sure. That would be great, or at least my email or something like that.
Sure.
And I can guide them. But yeah, so I decided to join the National Kidney Foundation 3 years ago because I want to help them lobby in Washington about insurance for dialysis, for post-transplant, and also to gather money for research. So it's a very meaningful board role for me. I am on a different board that has nothing to do with kidneys as well, because that's sort of where my career now evolved is, while I am very happy to do digital transformations, and if anybody out there is interested and needs my help, I'm very happy to do it. But really my focus is to be a board director, and to be in advisory roles, and basically to advise. And somebody gave me a quick analogy, and that was, you want to be the grandma and not the mother. And I'm like, yes, I want to advise and I want to help, but I don't necessarily want to be the mother to do it all, right? So that's sort of my next phase of my ambition. And it's hard. I can tell everyone that getting on the board of directors of a company is very difficult, but it's a goal, and I am determined that I will be on not just 2 boards, but I want to do 2 more in the mid-cap market. So I'm advertising if anybody's
That's right. Any takers, you know where to find her.
And then the other thing I just wanted to mention, Katherine, too, which I just think it has nothing to do with anything, but I am there is going to be a book coming out by STEM, STEM, which is an organization that encourages young people to go into the sciences. And my whole story is written down in one of those chapters, and it will be published in the spring. So if anybody's interested, at least for their children or for themselves or whatever, but it's essentially what I just covered in a lot more detail.
Okay, well, be sure to share that on LinkedIn, and if anybody wants follow up on that, be sure to follow Juliette so that you can get those details when those come out later this year. Congrats on that. That's a really big deal.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. And one last question before we wrap up. I think since you are the advisor, right? You're taking on advisory roles. Advise our audience right now on what you think makes a great supply chain leader in 2024.
Yeah. So I think a supply chain leader or a leader in general, I mean, I think a good leader is someone that truly appreciates and cares about their team. You are just as good as your team is. This is really important to know. And therefore, you have to nurture and you have to create an environment where people are safe to say what they feel and what they think, because great ideas come out in those environments. And when you have a toxic environment where everybody's afraid, which is also an environment I have been in, very unpleasant things happen. So being a good leader is valuing your people, making sure that you drive data-driven decisions. So you do have to have data. You have to get to the data. You have to be able to present it in a way that you understand it so that you can make good decisions and not gut-wrenching decisions, but data-driven decisions. And then I would just say a good leader is an open-minded leader that always looks at what is the next change I want to do. Because unless you change, and I said this earlier, unless you embrace change, you're not going to succeed in whatever business you're in. Because the only thing that's constant is change.
Which is why you are a transformational leader, somebody who can handle change with the best of them.
I suppose.
Well, I want to say thank you, and it's time for us to close out our time. Unfortunately, I feel like we could just. I had many more questions for those of you watching. I had about 8 more questions. There's just too much to cover in Juliette's life, and I appreciate you so much for sharing what you did and being so willing to be live on LinkedIn.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. And, I really hope that this kicks off your first and many, many, many successful more podcasts on Voice of Supply Chain.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who tuned in, whether it was for a few minutes or for more. I hope you all come away with, some feelings of being inspired to take on your own transformations, seek out the challenges, and feel like you're amongst some people and find some community within this Voice of Supply Chain group. And I want to let you guys know, coming up September 18th, we have Richard Martin joining us. His story includes all kinds of twists and turns, including F2 racing and solving the world's sustainability problems through capital project procurement. Just a little, sneak peek there of the next episode. So come back and join us next month. And until then, I wish you all the best. And that is it. This is our first show. Thanks for tuning in to Voice of Supply Chain, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.